This is Perch, and I came out for a little walk. Don't think it's windy here, so hopefully the audio holds up, but it's been a while since I've been able to just go out and walk and do a video, which is a bad thing, because I used to just go out and walk and run and no video, just enjoy myself. But I saw right before I headed out of the car that a question come in that I wanted to answer. I've been thinking about it, so it's like rather than just think about it the whole time, I'll just get it out, put out the video, and then move on with my day. So yeah, imagine that. So the question was, why does everybody have it in for DC? And it's a good question because, as the person who sent it asked, if I go to news sites and I go onto Twitter and I just go to kind of the different kind of comic outlets, there's always this subtle shade toward DC. So it didn't used to be this way. In fact, for when the New 52 was out, sites like IGN and others were over the top praising DC, even when they probably shouldn't have. They were praising them for things that weren't that great, but they were getting nothing but good press. And then that seemed to turn a few years ago. What happened? Well, here's my theory. And definitely it's an easier picture if we just say that it all changed about a year ago. But I actually think it's further back than that. So a couple things. I think, one, DC has kind of notoriously had, I think, people inside of it that have gossiped more and leaked information out, usually for political gain. There's some pretty decent, I would say, backstabbing that kind of took place within DC among some of the editorial staff, and even with some of the writers as well. There was kind of that bold, kind of douchey statement that was made when Tom King got his editor moved off of the book, off Batman. And so there's been this kind of undercurrent of dirty laundry that goes places. And Bleeding Cool in particular has gotten a lot of kind of dirty laundry about DC from former employees of DC. And that's, I think, helped, gossip dirt sells. So that's one key reason right there. If we're talking about the last year, there were a number of moves DC made to arguably strengthen itself. And one of those was moving away from Diamond, bringing the distribution kind of under control or under their own control, not doing the best job with some of that, and then having some layoffs right after. It wound up creating this news cycle of DC's walking away from the industry in a time when we all need to stand together. Now, that was kind of phony. People weren't standing together at all, but most of those moves were being made behind the scenes in private, and DC went public with it, and so they got a lot of negativity. And then you had the layoffs happen, and some of the people who got laid off were also some of the biggest leakers of information with the company. And so, of course, they leaked more, dirty laundry. It kind of upped their thing. I think when some of these people realized that their days of being a source that anyone listened to were coming to an end, so they just started dumping all kinds of dirty information out. And then you had, you definitely had some downsizing in the company, you had some projects go away, and kind of that tone for DC had been set of saying a lot of negative things in public, which people were doing. So some creators did and others did. And it kind of led to this kind of constant and steady stream of negativity around DC. And like with anything, once a certain narrative or a certain pace has been set, then people just continue it. Even if it doesn't make a lot of sense, you just have this kind of feeling, oh, DC is bad or incompetent or dumb, even though other publishers were doing the same things or worse things. DC kind of had that stigma and it stuck. So that's really kind of what's happened in the last year. By the way, none of this is to say that some of the things they were doing weren't dumb. Absolutely, they were doing some dumb things, but it did get overblown a bit. They wound up being kind of the brunt of a lot of the negativity in the industry. But if you go back a little further than that, there's always been this odd kind of dynamic at DC. I say always, but quite some time. Didio was probably a more aggressive person in control. People didn't make the comparison to Jim Shooter, but he had probably a style that resembled some of that. He was more aggressive than I think some of the other people who have been in that role in both at Marvel and DC. The Eddie situation, definitely how that was handled and the fact that it lingered for as long as it did. I think that also plays heavily into it because the company has had these kind of history of let's say, unprofessional behavior leading to full-blown kind of sexual harassment in that spectrum, that it's tolerated or kind of tried to brush aside. And here's the thing, Marvel's had the same stuff. And to today, there's some active current situations right now at Marvel along the same vein as the Eddie situation that are just being covered up and managed. They're being controlled. Whereas with DC, they don't seem to control those situations well. And then people just like to air a lot of dirty laundry. There was a thing a while back, or not a while back, like a couple days ago, where somebody was saying that they were working at DC. I think Colin Bunn was saying that the title needed to be more Trump-like, or it needed to appeal to Trump voters. I may be getting the people wrong. Colin also, yeah, it was Colin Bunn, as he was kind of doing some tell-all about his work, that the titles needed to appeal to Trump voters, I think was the comment that was made. I got some definite kind of back channel disputing that, saying nobody said that the title needed to appeal to Trump voters. What people said is the title needs to appeal to a wide audience. And who knows who said what. I can also imagine kind of an in-between situation where somebody said this title needs to appeal to a wide audience, people who are and aren't Trump voters. People bring in Trump into everything, so I can imagine something like that was said. But it's weird, though, because that kind of logic, hey, when we write titles, we need to go to a wide, all-inclusive audience. That's not bad advice. Now, does that mean the comic is being written where you have, like, I don't know, Newt Gingrich is like a hero and he flies in a little cape and saves the day? Or is it just that, we're trying not to, in the pages of the comic, actively insult one party or the other? Because there's a huge difference between the two. Is appealing to Trump voters mean you don't say in the comic, screw those Trump voters? Or you have a villain running around in a MAGA hat? Is that what we're talking about? Or are we talking about we just, again, I'm never completely sure what people are saying. I know, having seen some of the mails that have been forwarded and some of the other things, that companies have said stuff like, hey, we need to not pick sides with this thing. We need to not wade into this political dispute. And I think that's perfectly reasonable, frankly, good advice. It doesn't mean that you just turn a blind eye to problems. It means you don't actively engage in things that arguably have nothing to do with the comic. But be that as it may. So DC is interesting because I think they're suffering. From my perspective, I think it's definitely more than the last year. I think DC has had this kind of, there's a lot of dislike of the big two within the comic industry, Marvel and DC. But Marvel often gets a pass on a lot of it because, one, their parent company is very litigious, so people are a little bit more careful about what they say. And two, it's like they are the number one company, so it's like we're not going to piss off, both the number one and the number two company at the same time, so we'll give, the number one company, the big one, a pass, and we're going to kind of crap on the number two company. That's what it feels like. Not to say, again, that they haven't earned a lot of this. Definitely, I think, as I've said many times before on this channel, there's nobody who's seemingly in charge of DC's PR these days. It seems like it's an out-of-control train, and somebody should start to, get in front of the message rather than let other people do it. But, that's a problem of their own choosing. I don't know that a lot of the things that are said about DC are fair. I don't think they are fair. But I do think it's fair to say they should have had a better answer to this rather than just quietly ignore it. I'm always amazed at the amount of people from DC, whenever I say things like this, that will say things like, they'll send me private messages, and they'll say things like, none of this is fair. Don't they realize everything we're doing? And I'll say, no, they don't realize the things you're doing. You ought to get out there and say something. And the response I get is, well, we're not going to acknowledge those kinds of bad rumors. It's like, I get you, but there's a point where you kind of need to say something. There's also, I think, DC has a complicated history with former artists, not just the one, but others, and they're stuck in this weird position where people make unrealistic demands of them. I think if there's an artist that you no longer like in the company, or maybe they've left the company and they've gone on and they're now saying and doing crazy things, in your view, fine. But if they did work for your company at one point, they produce comics for you, particularly a bunch of comics, then customers are going to want those in trade paperbacks. They're going to want to read those later. Not necessarily, in fact, probably not because of the artist or the person involved. They're collectors. They want to read an unbroken run. So it's kind of silly to assume that, hey, we don't like this person anymore, and so none of the customers or the fans will want to read those things. They won't mind, picking up this copy of Green Lantern and then just missing like 6 issues. We just won't reprint those, and nobody will notice. That's silly. People are going to ask for that kind of stuff, but there's this kind of behavior in some of the comics media, like, we should erase that stuff completely. It's just not practical. So I think that's an area where both companies, but more DC, gets kind of unfairly targeted a lot by people, saying they're saying something that's not realistic. They're saying we should just erase all of this stuff from these people who we don't like anymore. But that's not how comics works. You can't just erase. You can't just pretend the past doesn't exist. You can't Thanos snap it out of existence. I realize that's another company, but anyway, there's my answer for you. That's kind of what I think is going on with DC, and it is a little weird. I believe that this is leading to what will be a worse situation for Marvel, because I think Marvel has a lot of problems within it that people are by and large ignoring. And so I think as those start to finally, as the dam bursts, then suddenly people are going to be like, oh, wait, how could this have possibly happened? It's like, no, it's happening all along. You were paying attention to something else. My feeling anyway. What do you think? Do you have any other theories? Why is DC disliked, or is it? Is DC disliked more than others? Do they get a bum rap? Do they get the short end of the stick from news media? Is that a true statement? Let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, like and subscribe. Hey, if there was some wind noise in this video, I apologize. I don't think so, but you never can quite tell. These microphones are sensitive as they are. Thanks for listening.